Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Sardar Patel Institute, Ahmedabad. Today we are going to talk about the module Effect of Intensity and Duration of Exercise on the Fuel Consumption from the paper Physiology and Sports Anthropology. Let's have a look at the learning objective of this module. In this module, we'll explain the factors involved in the interpretation of the exercise response. We'll summarize the metabolism of carbohydrates, fat, proteins, and lactate fuel substitute during the exercise. We'll describe the fuel energy systems involved at rest and rest to exercise, transition, and trace these relative contribution to the exercise intensity and the duration of the exercise. We'll describe the lactate formation during progressively increasing exercise intensity. We'll explain the factors responsible for the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, that is EPOC. We'll describe the influence of intensity and duration of exercise on fuel consumption. Exercise is a muscular activity resulting in the voluntary movement with energy expenditure above the resting level. It is sometimes considered a subset of the physical activity with a more specific focus. It is planned and structured to maintain or improve the physical fitness of an individual. Our body needs energy for all cellular and the bodily activities. The food we eat is transformed into chemical energy, and the total of all chemical reactions that occur in the body to provide energy for all the vital processes is called a metabolism. The process in which energy is used to build tissues is known as anabolism, while the processes in which energy is produced from the breakdown of the food and it is stored is known as the catabolism. Catabolism is of vital importance to the fuel consumption during exercise. The energy is provided based on the first law of the thermodynamics, which states that energy is neither created nor destroyed but can only be changed from one form to another. The potential fuel sources in the food are carbohydrate, fat, proteins, which ultimately yield water, carbon dioxide, and energy known as the adenosine triphosphate or ATPs. Now let's understand the exercise response. Exercise disrupts the equilibrium of the body's internal environment, that is the homeostasis, and brings changes in the physiological variable, which is termed as exercise response. An exercise response is determined by three vital factors: exercise modality, exercise intensity, and exercise duration. Exercise modality is the kind of activity or sports involved. It is usually identified by the action of the muscle, continuous or rhythmical, dynamic, resistance, static, or the kind of energy demand, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic or both. Walking, swimming, cycling, etc. are the aerobic exercises, while jumping, weightlifting are the anaerobic activities. Exercise intensity is the rate of energy expenditure in an exercise. It determines which energy systems are used and how long exercise can last and what kind of muscle fibers are recruited. The different measures of exercise intensity are heart rate, HR maximum, and oxygen consumption, that is VO2 max. VO2 max shows the overall metabolic exchange and exercise imposes and reflects the maximum exercise intensity, and it is measured in MET, that is milliliter per kg per minute units. Exercise intensity may be submaximal or maximal. Maximal exercise refers to the highest intensity or longest duration of an individual's capacity to do an exercise. Here the exercise begins at a level the individual is comfortable with and gradually increases until he or she is unable to do it. Submaximal exercise is divided into two, absolute and relative. A set exercise load performed at any intensity from just above resting to just below maximum is referred to as absolute submaximal work load. For example, if 3 individuals tested were able to lift a maximum of 100, 80 or 40 kg respectively, then it would be expected that the first individual could do more repetition of the 100 kg lift than the other two. In the same way, the second individual would be expected to lift more than the third, and the third would be expected to lift only once. It is often used in physical fitness tests. Relative submaximal workload is a workload above resting but below maximum that is allocated to each individual, specifically set as some percentage of maximal. They are used to describe the different type of exercise or to prescribe the exercise guidelines. Depending on the intensity, the exercise can be classified as low or light, which is less than or equal to 54% of the maximum, moderate, which is between 55 to 69% of the maximum, hard or heavy, between 70 to 89% of the maximum, very hard or very heavy, which range between 90 to 99% of the maximum, and the maximal, which is 100% of the maximum, and at the last the supra-maximal, which is more than 100% of the maximum. Exercise duration is the length of the time the muscular action continues in one session of exercise, whose duration may be as short as 1 to 3 seconds, for example, a single jump, or as long as 12 hours for a 180-kilometer bicycle ride. Exercise duration and the intensity are inversely proportional to each other. Now let's have a look at impact on the muscle and how does it respond during the exercise. There is a change in the carbohydrate and there is a change in the fat, as well as there is a change in the stored protein as shown here in the muscle tissues and triglyceride and glycogen level. Let's understand the body's fuel sources and metabolism during the exercise. Table 1 here summarizes the estimated energy stores in the humans. It shows the energy sources, the storage sites and the approximate energy. It shows the different energy sources, storage site and the approximate energies in kilocalories. Now let's have a look at this figure, which shows us an overview of cellular metabolism in body. It shows us the changes in the fat, that is triglyceride, changes in the carbohydrate and changes in the protein during an exercise. Now let's see carbohydrate as a main power fuel. Carbohydrate produce ATP quickly and it is the only fuel which can anaerobically produce ATP. It aids in the fat metabolism because in order to burn fat effectively, a certain amount of carbohydrate must be broken down. It is used by the fast twitch muscle fiber. The primary source of carbohydrate during high intensity exercise is the muscle glycogen. Plasma glucose from the liver glycogenolysis is the primary source of carbohydrate during a low intensity exercise. It is very vital during long duration exercise to compensate for the decline in the level of muscle glycogen. The form of carbohydrate metabolized mostly is glucose. In the skeletal muscles, glucose undergoes oxidation coupled with the phosphorylation to produce the ATPs. In the cell, excess glucose is stored as glycogen, which can be converted and stored as fat also. Glycogen is mostly stored in liver and muscle cells. The process by which glucose is converted into glycogen is called glycogenesis. Again, when extra glucose is required, the stored glycogen is broken down to provide glucose through glycogenolysis. The various stages of carbohydrate metabolism include stage 1 as glycolysis stage. The literal meaning of glycolysis is the dissolution of sugar. It catabolizes the glucose in 10 to 11 steps process. It begins with either glucose or glycogen and ends with the production of either pyruvate or lactic acid in anaerobic case or pyruvate in the aerobic cases. Glycolysis occurs in the cell cytoplasm. The stage 2 includes the formation of acetyl coenzyme A. It involves the conversion of pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A within the mitochondrial matrix. No oxygen is used directly in this stage but occurs only in the presence of oxygen. The stage 3 involves the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is a cycle as it begins and ends with the same substance known as oxaloacetate. Then stage 4 is the electron transport and oxidative phosphorylation. Here an electrical current is created while transporting the hydrogen ion into the mitochondrial matrix. There is a synthesis of ATP from ADP by the addition of the phosphate. This picture shows us the pictorial representation of the carbohydrate metabolism, including all the stages discussed earlier. This table shows the ATP production from the carbohydrate metabolism, which can be clearly seen from this table. Let's see fat as a low power fuel. Fat produces ATP slowly through the aerobic metabolism. It is used by the slow twitch muscle fibers. The intramuscular triglycerides are the primary source of fat during higher intensity exercises, whereas the primary source of fat during the low intensity exercise is plasma fatty acids, that is FFA. It's an energy dense fuel yielding 9.13 kilocalories per gram. A person can deplete the stored glycogen within 2 hours of the high intense exercise or 1 day of bed rest, while fat stores can last for weeks even with moderate activity. A triglyceride consists of 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Fatty acids are saturated with the hydrogen, or they can be unsaturated, reduced hydrogen binding, or they can be polyunsaturated, which are triglycerols bonds without the hydrogen. They can be oleic acid, palmitic acid, etc. are some of the examples of the fatty acids. Let's understand the fat metabolism. Triglyceride is converted into glycerol and FFA to the mitochondrial matrix. The FFA undergoes the process of beta oxidation there. Now, what is beta oxidation? Beta oxidation is a cyclic series of steps wherein the FFA is broken down to form acetyl coenzyme A. The number of cycles depends upon the number of carbon atoms. Mostly, fatty acids have 14 to 24 carbon atoms. This pictorial representation makes clear the beta oxidation during the fat metabolism. When carbohydrate supplies are sufficient, then there is no tissue, but when it is inadequate as a result of prolonged exercise or fasting, oxaloacetate is converted to glucose. When oxaloacetate is not available to combine with acetyl coenzyme A to form citrate, the liver converts the acetyl coenzyme A derived from the fatty acids into ketone or ketone bodies. Ketone are of 3 forms: acetoacetic acid, beta-hydroxybutyric acid, and acetones, which are very strong acids. They are used as fuel by the muscles, nerves, and brain. If the ketone accumulates, then a condition known as ketosis takes place, which disrupts the normal physiological functioning like acid-base balance. Ketosis may result from the prolonged exercise or diabetes or inadequate diet. Trained individuals can effectively use ketone aerobically than untrained individuals. When muscles glycogen stores fall in the later stage of prolonged exercise, proteins are broken down into amino acids and alanine, which are directly metabolized by the muscles. Protein accounts for about 2% to the total energy production during exercise, and it may reach 5 to 10% during the last minute of prolonged exercise. Proteins also provide energy when daily diet is inadequate in total calories or carbohydrate. The final common pathways of the Krebs cycle, electron transport and oxidative phosphorylation, are used. 6 amino acids enter metabolism at the level of pyruvate, 8 at acetyl coenzyme A, 4 at alpha ketoglutarate, 4 at succinate, 2 at fumarate and 2 at oxaloacetate. Except acetyl coenzyme A, all the intermediates are converted to pyruvate before being utilized as fuel. The acetyl coenzyme A is directly used in Krebs cycle and electron transport. Let's understand the transamination and oxidative deamination. The nitrogen-containing amino group is removed by the process of transamination and sometimes by oxidative deamination before amino acids can be used as fuel. In transamination, NH2 amino group from an amino acid is transferred to a keto acid, resulting in the formation of new amino acid and a different keto acid. Mostly, ketoacceptor of NH2 is a alpha ketoglutarate, with glutamate being the amino acid formed. This process occurs in the muscles and liver cells. Lactate can be used as a fuel source by skeletal muscles and the heart, where it is converted to acetyl coenzyme A and enters the Krebs cycle. It delays the onset of fatigue during exercise. It is also converted to glucose in the liver, which is referred to as Cori cycle. The process by which liver converts lactate into glucose is termed as gluconeogenesis. And then the final product, that is glucose, is transported back to the muscles and used as a fuel. Lactate shuttle occurs wherein lactate is produced in one tissue and is transported to another. Now let's understand the energy requirement at rest. Lemon and Nagel in 1981 have estimated that fat contributes 41 to 67%, carbohydrate to 33 to 42%, and protein about 17% of the total daily energy requirements of the human body at rest. Through aerobic metabolism, 100% of the ATP is produced. The oxygen consumption is 0.25 liter per minute and 3.5 milliliter per kg per minute, and the blood lactate levels are low. Let's understand the transition from rest to exercise. Here, the immediate energy is ATP-PC system. The high-intensity, short-duration exercises, for example, lifting a heavy weight, requires an immediate energy supply. And this energy comes from ATP through the interaction of ADP and phosphocreatinine. Within 20 to 30 seconds of maximal exercise, the quantity of these compounds becomes fully depleted. A runner cannot maintain maximum speed throughout the run. He slows down his speed at the later part of the race, often when the winner slowing down the least. If the continuous energy supply is ceased, then high-intensity exercise stops. Let's see short-term energy, the lactic acid or glycolytic system. The energy to phosphorylate ADP comes from glycogen stored in the muscle, which is broken down by anaerobic glycolysis, resulting in lactate formation. Let's see the lactate accumulation. During light and moderate exercises, 50% aerobic capacity, lactate disappearance and oxygen consuming reactions, that is aerobic glycolysis and lipid and protein metabolism, becomes equivalent to blood lactate accumulation of NADH production during the glycolysis, which prevents the cell to release the hydrogen down the respiratory chain due to insufficient oxygen supply at the tissue level. The imbalance in the hydrogen release and the cytoplasmic NADH ratio cause the pyruvate to accept the excess of hydrogen atoms, which gets attached to the pyruvate molecule, leading to the lactate formulation. Under aerobic conditions, lactate oxidation by other tissues results in no net lactate accumulation. That is, blood lactate concentration remains stable. The relationship of the blood lactate and maximal oxygen consumption during a light, moderate and strenuous exercise among trained and untrained individuals can be understood. What caused the lactate threshold? The point at which the blood lactic acid rises systematically during the incremental exercise is known as the lactate threshold or anaerobic threshold. It is used for predicting the performance of the individual and for the planning a training intensity. Controversy exists over the mechanism of lactate threshold. However, there is possible that it is caused by any one or the combination of following, like less oxygen in the muscles, hypoxia, or recruitment of the LDH enzymes in the fast twitch muscle fibers, reduced rate of lactate removal from the blood, and accelerated glycolysis. Accelerated glycolysis is caused when NADH is produced faster than it gets transported to the mitochondria, or when excess NADH in the cytoplasm converts pyruvic acid to lactic acid. Let's see the lactate producing capacity. During maximal exercises, the blood lactate increases with specific sprint power aerobic training and decreases when training stops. In short duration maximal exercises or sprint power, athletes achieve 20 to 30% of higher blood lactate level than their counterparts due to the improved motivation during the exercise training. Increased intramuscular glycogen stores, the training induced increases in glycolytic related enzymes, particularly the phosphofructokinase. Let's see what is long-term energy, that is the aerobic or oxidative system. Aerobic metabolism provides all of the ATP when intense exercise continues beyond several minutes. What is the oxygen consumption during the exercise? The oxygen consumption during exercise remains stable during the duration of effort. The term steady state or steady rate reflect a balance between energy required by the working muscle and ATP production in aerobic metabolism. Here, any lactate produced either oxidizes or reconverts to glucose. Steady rate aerobic metabolism determines the capacity to sustain submaximal exercise. Individuals possess many steady rate level of exercise from sitting and watching TV to gardening for 30 minutes. Now let's have a look at the oxygen deficit. In the beginning of an exercise, oxygen consumption remains below a steady rate level. This lag in oxygen uptake at the beginning of exercise is called as the oxygen deficit. However, oxygen consumption increases rapidly when oxygen combines with the hydrogen. After several minutes of submaximal exercise, oxygen consumption attained a steady rate between energy requirement and aerobic energy transfer. During light and the moderate exercise, trained and untrained individuals show similar values for steady rate oxygen uptake. However, trained individuals reach a steady rate more rapidly with a smaller oxygen deficit than sprint power athletes, older adults or untrained individuals. This means that trained persons consume greater total oxygen during oxygen with smaller anaerobic energy transfer than the untrained person. Now let's have a look at maximal oxygen uptake, that is VO2 max. It is defined as an individual's capacity to resynthesize the ATP aerobically or the highest oxygen uptake achieved despite increase in the intensity of exercise. Above VO2 max, exercise can be performed only through anaerobic glycolysis with lactate formation. Increase in exercise intensity does not produce an expected increase in oxygen uptake. Let's understand the recovery from the exercise. Even after the completion of the exercise, oxygen consumption is increased for several hours. Oxygen consumption assesses caloric expenditure. When oxygen consumption is elevated, the resting metabolic rate will be higher. A.V. Hill in 1922 proposed the oxygen depth theory, which suggests that 1/5 of the increase in oxygen consumption is utilized in the oxidation of lactate and converting it back to the glycogen, thereby repaying the oxygen deficit produced at the onset of exercise. Oxygen debt produces a curve characterized as rapid phase and slow phase of oxygen dissipation. Margaria et al. In 1933 called the fast phase lactic acid and the slower phase lactic acid. The alactic acid phase replenishes non-lactic acid component such as the phosphorylation of free creatinine to form creatinine phosphate and replenishes muscles and blood oxygen stores. The lactate phase converts lactic acid to glucose, increases energy need due to elevated heart rate and breathing, increasing metabolic rate due to elevated body temperature and elevated epinephrine and norepinephrine. In 1984, Gesser and Brook proposed a new term EPOC, that is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, meaning that approximately 20% of elevated oxygen consumption is used to repay the oxygen debt. EPOC is greater after a higher intensity exercise due to greater depletion of the PC, higher concentration of lactic acid, blood epinephrine and norepinephrine, and higher body temperature. Oxygen uptake during exercise and recovery from the light steady rate exercise, moderate to intense steady rate exercise, and exhaustive exercise with no steady rate of aerobic metabolism is illustrated. Now let's have a look at the factors contributing towards the EPOC. Here we can see that the resynthesis of the PC in muscles, the lactate conversion to glucose, restoration of the muscles and blood oxygen stores, post-exercise elevation of heart rate and breathing, elevated body temperature and elevated hormone are the various factors which contributes towards the EPOC. This figure shows us the oxygen uptake during exercise and recovery from the light steady rate exercise. Here it can be seen from the picture A, and the part B shows us the change of moderate to intense steady rate exercise, and figure C shows us the exhaustive exercises with no steady rate of aerobic metabolism, and all these figures shows us the relative changes in the oxygen deficit during all kind of exercises. The removal of the lactic acid following the exercise can be explained by the classical theory, which says that majority of lactic acid is converted to glucose in the liver. Recent research has shown that 70% of the lactic acid is oxidized and used by the heart and the skeletal muscles. 20% is converted to the glucose and 10% is converted to amino acids. The lactic acid is removed more rapidly with moderate exercise with the optimum intensity of 30 to 40% of VO2 max. This pictorial representation shows us the blood lactate removal after a strenuous exercise. This shows us the acute response to exercises. Here we can see that during an acute exercise response, the various systems which are influenced are respiratory system, cardiovascular system and the muscular system. There is a change in the fuel requirement, oxygen delivery and the waste removal during different kind of aerobic or anaerobic exercises. Let's see the fuel consumption during a high intensity short duration exercise. In exercises such as 100-meter dash or 25-meter swim or lifting a heavy weight, more calories are burned in less time. More carbohydrates or glycogen are utilized. The increased blood level of epinephrine also increases the metabolism of carbohydrate, as high level of epinephrine increases the muscles. Now let's see the low intensity or high duration exercises. The low intense exercises, that is less than 30% of the VO2 max, relies primarily on the fat. The total rate of fat oxidation is greatest at the higher intensities, below lactate threshold, but not necessarily more fat. Let's see the incremental exercises. The oxygen uptake increases linearly until VO2 max is reached VO2 max level, which depends on the ability of the cardiorespiratory system to deliver oxygen to the muscles and the ability of the muscles to use the oxygen in the production of energy, that is ATP. During incremental exercises, lactate threshold or anaerobic threshold is attained where blood lactic acid accumulates. During a prolonged exercises, which is more than 10 minutes, the ATP is produced aerobically, and during submaximal exercises, a steady state oxygen uptake is maintained. In low intensity prolonged exercises greater than of 30 minutes, there is a gradual shift from carbohydrate to the fat metabolism. Triglycerides are broken down into glycerol and FF by the enzymatic activity of the lipase due to an increased rate of lipolysis and rising level of the epinephrine. This table shows us the fuel consumption during an exercise, which shows us the influence of the intensity and the duration of the exercise. Here we can see that with the change in the intensity of the exercise, the type of fuel consumed also differ, as it can be clearly seen from this table that there is a more consumption of the carbohydrate and lesser or declining consumption of the fat with the increase in the intensity of the exercise. This particular table shows us the fuel utilization by the muscles for different kind of exercise. As we can clearly see from this table that there is a different utilization during the different kind of exercise, like very high intensity or short duration exercise, and high intensity or short duration exercise, and high intensity with moderate duration, moderate intensity exercise with long duration, and the low intensity or long duration exercise have the different kind of fuel utilization. Let's understand the factors underlying the fuel selection. The fuel selection and exercise intensity is one of the factor. At low exercise intensity, that is when VO2 is approximately 20%, the total energy expenditure and total fat oxidation is low, but approximately 60% of the energy expenditure comes from fat. Carbohydrate and fat contributes energy equally during more moderate intensity exercise, as it can be illustrated, which shows the relationship between the exercise intensity and percentage of the total fuel sources. At higher exercise intensities, that is when VO2 max is approximately 50%, total energy expenditure and total fat oxidation is higher, but lower percentage of the energy expenditure comes from fat. The more fit an individual, the more fats they utilize over carbohydrates due to increase in uptake of FFA. Illustration of the crossover concept of the carbohydrate and fat metabolism. As the intensity of exercise increases, the fuel for the muscle shifts from fat to carbohydrate metabolism due to the increasing level of epinephrine in the blood and the movement of the fast muscle fiber. This is known as the crossover concept, as it is seen from this figure. The fat metabolism at different exercise intensity is highlighted in figure. Is low intensity exercise best for burning the fat? At a low exercise intensity, 60% of the fuel is derived from the fat, but total energy expended and total fat oxidation is low. At a higher intensity exercise, 40% of the fuel is derived from the fat, however, total energy expended and total fat oxidation is also higher than the low intensity exercise. Therefore, an individual won't necessarily burn more total fat by exercising at a lower intensity level. The next factor is the fuel selection and the exercise duration. During short duration exercise, more carbohydrate is used. Muscle glycogen is used first, followed by the blood glucose. During longer duration exercises, more fat is used. The fat oxidation gradually increases as exercise extends to 1 hour or more, and glycogen depletes. Towards the end of prolonged exercise, with glycogen reserves low, circulating FFA supplies nearly 80% of the total energy required. From 0 to 4 seconds, ATP gives strength to the muscle. ATPs and PC sustain the power from 0 to 7 seconds, followed by lactic acid till 1.5 minutes. For 3 minutes and above the duration of exercise, fuel is utilized through electron transport and oxidative phosphorylation processes. An influence of the duration on fuel sources is clearly marked in figure. The next factor is fat and carbohydrate interaction during exercise. Fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate. Glucose is required to sustain exercise, and once we are depleted of carbohydrate, any exercise intensity will become difficult. Even though fat burns at lower intensity, blood glucose is needed to keep exercise pace without fatigue. This indicates that there are common pathways for both fat and carbohydrate oxidation, and that fat metabolism is dependent on the carbohydrate catabolism. In the citric acid cycle, many of the intermediates are the product of the glucose catabolism. Both carbohydrate and fats are broken down to acetyl coenzyme A. If adequate carbohydrates are depleted in the body, many of the intermediates of the citric acid will be used to synthesize glucose in order to maintain the blood glucose level. Let's understand the estimation of fuel consumption during the exercise. The different type of fuel play a part in energy metabolism, and for a certain volume of oxygen, the ratio of carbon dioxide produced to the oxygen consumed, that is VCO2 by VO2, it can be estimated only when the subject reaches the steady state, because VCO2 and VO2 reflect the metabolic exchange of gases in the tissues only at this state. Now let's summarize the module. Response to exercise, which is always a disruption in the equilibrium of the body's internal environment, depends on the exercise modality, intensity and duration. Depending upon these, the type of exercise response exercises are classified into 6 categories. The carbohydrate is a fuel source and it is metabolized in 4 stages. When a person utilizes the fuel from rest to light or moderate exercise, the oxygen uptake increases rapidly, generally reaching a steady state within 1 to 4 minutes. The difference between the oxygen requirement of exercise and the oxygen consumed during exercise is termed as the oxygen deficit, which we have dealt in details. This suggests that the anaerobic pathways contribute to the overall production of ATPs early in exercises. After steady state is reached, the body's ATP is metabolized through aerobic process. The recovery oxygen consumption or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, that is EPOC, reflects the metabolic demands of exercise and the exercise-induced physiological imbalances that persist into the recovery. Moderate physical activities following the intense exercises aids in recovery. Lactate threshold is the point at which the blood lactic acid rises systematically during the incremental exercises. The conversely exists over the mechanism of the lactate threshold, but it may be caused due to the combination of the various factors. Low muscle oxygen, accelerated glycolysis, recruitment of the fast twitch muscle fiber, and reduced rate of lactate removal, lactate threshold is utilized as a marker of the training intensity and to predict the performance of an athlete. The type and the amount of the energy substrate utilized depends on the complex interaction of the type, duration and intensity of the exercise. The proportion of the muscle fiber involved, the training and the nutritional status and short-term dietary status of the individual.